we always think about the ultimate goal being raising our kids to control their emotions and be able to manage their feelings. But it really starts with us.
100%. You can't teach a skill that you don't have yourself. And the way that you choose to do something different is you have to choose to see it differently. And if you're not seeing the situation differently, and this goes for, all ages, this goes from infants to in-laws, right?
Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more.
Welcome to the next episode of the Baby Sleep Connection. I am your host, Heather Boyd, and I'm very excited to have a guest on today. But I'll start with some thoughts around my view that in order to thrive as human beings, we need to surround ourselves with positive role models and examples that help us strive to be better versions of ourselves. Although it's reassuring and validating to know we're not alone in the struggle, I believe that mentorship and modeling become the root of reaching through challenges to something amazing. Now, Mr. Chazz Lewis is one of these amazing mentors that I have been following on social media. He is insatiably optimistic, yet with razor-sharp focus on the ways to up the ante on supporting children who are developing into amazing human beings in their own right by understanding emotional development. Mr. Chazz Lewis is an educator who is on a mission to enjoy the process of becoming the best version of himself and help others do the same along the way. He has a master's degree in executive leadership at American University and has used his own teaching experiences to develop a more conscious, informed, joyful, and dignity-driven approach to learning, leading, and elevating others. Mr. Chazz, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here and I hope to help some people out there today.
I'm certainly sure that, a lot of the parents that listen have very young babies, but they're always looking forward and ahead to being responsive parents in the toddler and preschool and all the years beyond that. So I wonder if you can start by talking about the view that you take around discipline called conscious discipline. What is it?
So, in short, conscious discipline is a brain-based social emotional learning program that is about 28 years old. And it is a framework that I practice. And you'll hear a little bit more about that today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I wonder, too, if we could start with looking at some of the challenges that we have as parents is in understanding how, when we are parenting in a very challenging situation, where our kids may not be all that cooperative or they're pushing back on what we thought would be a pretty smooth go, and we get triggered. I wonder with that self-regulation piece for parents, that ability to remain calm or get into a calm place again, what tips or framework do you have for parents to be able to do that?
Well, it just so happens that I know this process called the 5 steps of self-regulation. And if you're interested, I could tell you all about it.
I would love to hear it, Mr. Chazz.
All right, so let's go. Let's break it down. The 5 steps. And the 5 steps are I calm, I feel, I choose, and I solve. Now, what does all of that mean? So let's break it down. Let's start with the I am. The first part is just recognizing that you're triggered. A lot of times that is a very difficult thing for us because we like to try to shove down our emotions and pretend like we're not having them and say that we're fine when we're really not fine. And we're like, I'm fine. But everyone in the room knows that often we're the last ones to find out that we're actually triggered. And so first, recognizing that you are triggered. The second step is doing something to start to calm down your body. And something that I recommend for everybody, because this works for everybody if you learn how to do it, it's breathing. And the way that you breathe the way that you breathe to get the benefits of breathing is breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you want to make sure that your out breath is longer than your in-breath through your nose. And the other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is when you breathe in through your nose, that your belly is expanding, because you want your diaphragm to expand, and that is how you get the benefits of breathing. So to help you calm, and there's so many benefits to breathing and doing deep belly breaths, but helping yourself manage stress is one of the many benefits that breathing can give you. Now, the third step, I feel part is about really getting familiar with what you're feeling in that moment. And yes, it is, part of it is being able to name exactly what you're feeling. But the other part of it is being able to feel exactly what you're feeling and where you feel it. Sometimes we feel the frustration in our fist, or the disappointment in our face, or our face gets hot, or we clench our fists, or our fingers get tingly, or we feel it in our gut, or we feel it in our chest, or we tighten up, or we sweat. And these are sensations that are important for us to pay attention to. And being able to name what we're feeling and what that actually feels like in our body helps us create enough separation from the feeling to actually experience the feeling, as opposed to becoming the feeling. There's a big difference between being angry and acting out your anger and acting out your frustration, and feeling angry and just experiencing the emotion of anger or frustration or disappointment or whatever feeling that you're feeling, or excitement even. And we have a phrase that it's a very common phrase in that Conscious Discipline remix, and I remix. So I'm just going to skip to my remix, but it's similar to another quote, but I like mine because mine rhymes. So
rhymes are always good. Rhymes are great.
They help you remember, right? So what we resist persists, and what we accept can rest. And it's just the idea that if we resist against what we're feeling, it's going to, we're going to be probably acting out that feeling much longer, and it's going to last much longer than probably what we want it to. But if we can accept it and just feel, just as I described, accept what we're feeling. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I feel like my face getting hot. Then that feeling will eventually dissipate. It'll be able to rest, and we won't feel like we have to hold on to it. We won't feel like our body will be able to let it go. And that is helpful, to be able to just experience the feeling and to be able to sit in that feeling and experience it, because the fourth step, I always say, is like the most difficult step, in my opinion. I can do the first three steps pretty easily because they're just, it's something you can just easily do, right? And that this fourth step is really getting to like a different state. Those first three steps really are all, in my mind, are just preparing you to do the fourth step. And the fourth step is I choose, which is really just I'm choosing to see it differently. Right. The big part of it is being able to choose. A lot of times before we get to the I choose and choosing to see it differently, we are seeing the child as a bad kid, as opposed to a kid who's just learning to navigate the world and just missing some skills. Or we get these things come up from our mental models of just, we see, I'll give an example for the babies, because a lot of times you have a baby, but you also have an older sibling, right? And sometimes maybe the older sibling does something like they hit, or they're a little aggressive, or they're hurt, and then we have this idea something comes in our mind, this story pops in our mind that, our older child is bad bully who's going to become a murderer, serial killer if we don't nip this in the bud right now, as opposed to this is a child who's maybe learning how to connect with baby, learning how to play with baby in a way that is safe for everyone and, meets everyone's needs. And they just don't know how to do it yet. And maybe they're just missing the skill of how to connect with baby, how to play with baby in a way that isn't going to harm baby. And so just choosing to see it differently can shift a lot And once we choose to see it differently, then the next part, the fifth step, becomes much easier. And this fifth step is coming up with the win-win solution, right? And so in the situation that I just talked about, where it's very common where the older sibling is trying to play with baby, but they end up hurting baby in some way, and because they're not being gentle enough, or they let their emotions or their impulse control gets the best of them. Seeing it as, okay, how can I teach this child, this older sibling, to play with baby in a more appropriate way? What is a way that older sibling, big brother or big sister, can play with baby, can connect with baby in a way that is safe for everyone and meets everyone's needs, right? So instead of, maybe jerking them around or hitting them or whatever they're doing, maybe you're teaching them to do peekaboo. Maybe you're teaching them how to, play some of the games that you play with baby that they would be able to do with their current skill level. So it's coming up with win-win solutions, because at the end of the day, that older sibling just wants to connect with their little sibling, and you just want everyone to be safe. So how can we find a way for everyone's needs to be met there? And that's the 5 steps of self-regulation, as opposed to what we might have a tendency to do in this situation and just react, get triggered, now recognize we're triggered, and then just put our emotions on the child. And we say things like, how could you do that? You should know better. What's wrong with you? You need to, right? And we yell and just put our emotions onto the child, as opposed to self-regulating and getting to a place where we can teach them how to do better next time, as opposed to punishing them or shaming them or hitting them for not having the skills to do better this time.
Wow. And what comes up for me as you're talking, Mr. Chazz, is that as parents, we often react. It's like the default. It's the not thinking part. And so when you talk about step number 4, the choice, it's like this cognitive, like, slow down enough to actually take the fork in the road and choose another way, a win-win way, because the other default, I think, is that we think that we're on the opposite team sometimes when we're triggered. We're on the opposite team as our kids. Our kids are trying to be difficult, even if deep down we know that's not true. That's like the surface reaction default. So I love that rewriting of that and choosing something different for the win-win. But it also brings up for me this idea that although much of what you talk about has older children in mind, the idea of being able to regulate our own emotions, because we always think about the ultimate goal being raising our kids to control their emotions and be able to manage their feelings. But it really starts with us.
100%. You can't teach a skill that you don't have yourself. And the way that you choose to do something different is you have to choose to see it differently. And if you're not seeing the situation differently, and this goes for, all ages, this goes from infants to in-laws, right? And because you can, even that baby, now sometimes the babies have a special way about them where, depending on our state, it's going to be easier to give empathy to a baby than it can be to a human that is walking and talking and maybe seemingly being more intentional about their choices. But even with babies are, they're not trying to give us a hard time. They're having a hard time. But if we see it other way, like, this baby's just trying to give me a hard time, this baby's trying to manipulate me, then we're going to likely make choices that are potentially harmful. And that's, when things don't go our way in consciousness, when we talk about the 3 different brain states, the executive state, the emotional state, and the survival state. And the executive state is when we're all regulated, but anything can happen where something doesn't go our way and we get triggered down to our emotional state. It doesn't make you a bad parent or it doesn't make them a bad kid. It's just how the brain works. When something doesn't go our way, we get triggered down into an emotional state. And this is when we have a tendency to verbally react. And this is when we have a tendency to see the world as me versus you. And that's what you were talking about and that's where we also have a tendency to get in these power struggles, right? And so recognizing when we're seeing the world, they're seeing it as a me versus you. They're trying to just get on my nerves. They're just trying to attack me. They know what they're doing. They're just trying to manipulate me. That is a signal of like, oh, recognizing, oh, I am triggered. And then that's a signal for us to go through those 5 steps, because it's going to be really hard for us to be helpful in that moment if we are in an emotional state or we are in a survival state where we have a tendency to use our survival state skills of fight, flight, fawn, and freeze, which can happen a lot, especially in the beginning when you have a new baby and you're not getting as much sleep and there's so many things going on and you're just trying to figure out, you just want to keep this baby alive, and so everything is a threat. And so it can be very easy to slip into a survival state and even just trying to push past it, accidentally do something that isn't very helpful and maybe even potentially harmful for a baby.
Yeah, well, and that us versus them too, it really varies on the time of day. And I think about the parents I work with who are very responsive and able to self-regulate quite well during the day, but at 2 a.m, all of their, thoughts that they've had during the day about being able to manage the challenge go out the window and that default kicks in. And even though the next morning when the sun is shining and everything feels a little better, they look back and say, how could I have felt like this was unfair to me or my baby was giving me a hard time? Because once the sun is up and the day is fresh, it can be easier to put things into perspective again. Mm-hmm. I wonder, aside from the nighttime, the 2 a.m. piece, which is always a challenge, in general, we don't have these scripts already as parents. Generally, most of us don't. We're writing them ourselves or following people such as yourself or reading materials that support us in reframing our parenting approach. Why is it so hard? What makes it so hard to be able to rewrite the way that we're approaching parenting, even when we have the best of intentions?
Good question. This isn't just mindset thing. It's not just, like I learned better, so now I automatically do better. I think, there's a common phrase, once you know better, now you can do better. I would adjust that a little bit. Once you know better, you have the opportunity to do better, but there's a lot of work that comes with it, because what happened to us, how we were responded to, the patterns of behavior that we have have been conditioned into us. And there are these generational patterns, these generational cycles of just how we were raised that are still with us. And it is a part of it is unwriting and consciousness, when we call it the CD-ROM, right? And you have the CD-ROM that's kind of like that's been written on from the time that you were very young, and now you carry with you throughout life. And when we want to break our patterns of behavior, we have to rewrite our program. We have to rewrite our CD-ROM. And the updated version, for those who are like, okay, CD-ROM, we have to update our playlist, right? We have a lot of songs on our playlist that are not very helpful, that have been conditioned, that we didn't choose to put there. And part of the work we have to do now is to not really overriding necessarily to play the songs that on our playlist, because really those songs are always going to be there to some extent. It's about adding new songs, creating new playlists, right? To the point where when you get triggered and things don't go your way, that you're not playing the same old playlist that you grew up with, the default playlist of, you should know better, what's wrong with you, you're being dramatic, you're just trying to get on my nerves. All these stories that we have been conditioned with and taught. We have to have new playlists. And once we add more and more and more and more songs, it's going to be easier for us to choose the song that's going to be more helpful, that's going to help us move back up to the executive state and respond as opposed to react. And I mean, you might have start off with 10 songs in your playlist, right? But over time, you can add 200 songs to your playlist. And so when you put it on shuffle, it's going to be much less likely you're going to hear the unhelpful old songs. And it's going to be much more likely that you hear the helpful mantras in the songs. This child's not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. Q-tip, quit taking it personally. Oops, it stands for our opportunity to practice skills. Or our opportunity to problem solve, right? And so then as you keep on, as you kind of retrain your inner voice and add new songs on the playlist, it makes it easier to actually do better when it comes time, because that is a big piece of what holds us back from doing better when we have learned something different.
I love that analogy. Well, and the update too from CD-ROM, which I know all about, the playlist. When you're talking about those little mantras or those phrases too, I always think of the value of repetition and, having that playlist, the songs that support this new way of approaching discipline consciously. And the idea that repetition is really the way to reinforce that and get it rewritten. I always think about the value, and I don't know if any parents that I work with take me up on this, but I'm always telling them to take Post-it notes and jot the things that are most helpful to them and stick them on mirrors and walls everywhere so that it's there all the time. But I also wonder, that the playlist includes some of the songs that, as you say, they don't get taken off the list. They're still there. They're going to come up from time to time. Do you have any words of wisdom for parents who are feeling really frustrated or guilty or disappointed with their own parenting because they're not feeling like they're there where they want to be yet?
Yes, your role, your duty is not to break every generational cycle in one go. So I'm going to do another analogy here. This is, if you are on this journey of doing more connected and collaborative based parenting as opposed to fear and control based parenting. You're listening to this podcast and you're listening to me and following me and you are on this journey. This is like new technology, right? And so I equate it to like the first iPhone, right? And you might be the first iPhone in your family, and you may have been raised by a BlackBerry or a flip phone or a rotary phone, even. Like, we've all come from different places in our journey and all are currently on different places in our journey. And so first off, just take a moment to just applaud yourself, pat yourself on the back, hug yourself, kiss your brain, and just celebrate the fact that you're here on this journey, because this is a huge step. The step from BlackBerry to iPhone, huge step. The step from rotary phone to iPhone, huge step. So celebrate it. Celebrate that first. Second, you being the first iPhone, what do? What happens, right? You're going to continue learning, and it's not going to be perfect. You're going to continue learning, though, and you're going to get little pieces of information here and there, and you're going to improve things. You're going to try things, and think about it like little updates, right? You're going to get updates, and from update to update, it doesn't feel like much has changed. Like, I updated my phone just recently, and it's like, I don't even know what happened. I don't even know what changed. Was there any difference? Why did I even update my phone? But over the course of 50 updates, of 100 updates, day to day of the constant updates, once you look back at your phone, it's like, it's almost unrecognizable how much growth, how much change there has been over time. And so those little steps that you take day to day are those little updates. And unfortunately, we want growth to be like a straight slanted line up, but the growth really looks more like the stock market. It goes up and down, 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 up and down. But you keep on working at it, you stick with it, you keep on learning, you keep on doing those updates. Eventually there's going to be a net positive, and eventually there is going to be growth. There's going to be some days where it's going to feel like a setback or like I'm going backwards, but that is what growth looks like. And you keep on making these little updates. And then what happens next? Your children, the next generation, they build off of that. And when they start when they're parenting and when they are where you're at right now, they have already, their starting line is your finish line, right? They have already get to start at the place where you've had to work so hard to get to. And that is also something, a huge a huge accomplishment. You're not just raising your children, you're raising your children's children, and they get to build off of everything that you learned, and that they will have seen your growth, and they will grow, and they will grow, and they grow, and their children will build off of what they've learned, and so on and so on and so on, until eventually we have, there's the Google Glass or the Vision Pro or whatever the next innovation in technology is. And it all started from you continuing to take those little steps here and there. And so it's not about being perfect every day. Perfect doesn't exist. So I always say, avoid being a perfectionist. Be an improvementist. The goal isn't to be perfect every day. The goal is to improve a little every day.
A little bit. I love that idea of continual learning. Because again, I think we look at our kids as being the ones who are learning. They go through such immense learning in the first 3 years, in the first 10 years, all the way up till the brain gets a little less changey by age 25, I think, is when we're discovering that how long it takes for the brain to change. But what comes up is this idea of the growth mindset too, and that if we're able to see that the better able we are to take this learning approach, to adapt to these new changes, to explore and be continually learning, we gift that to our children in a way that we couldn't possibly do if we thought they were the only learner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
We really model that for them, and children learn so much by watching us and watching what we do. And so they really do. If we're continuing to learn and embrace the mistakes and saying, oops, like mistakes are an essential part of the learning process, and conflict is an opportunity for learning. When we oops, the oops just stands for our opportunity to practice skills or our opportunity to problem solve, as opposed to oops means we have to beat ourselves up and there's got to be shame involved, which is really counterproductive to learning and growing and thriving. Then they will see that and they will learn that, and there is that. Learning that lesson is so much more powerful than us trying to pretend like we're perfect all the time. Because guess what? Children are not perfect either. They're just as they're learning so much. They're making even more mistakes than we are because they're new to so many. They're learning more things. So it follows, because mistakes are an essential part of learning, that they're going to be making more mistakes than us. And what we want to do is teach them how to make mistakes instead of teaching them that mistakes are bad. And so as we model that, now it's easier said than done, because again, that stuff, that fear of rejection, that perfectionism is in our body. And so it's something that we also have to work through too, and to rewrite that CD-ROM, to add some new songs in our playlist. And the more we do it, the more they'll see it, the more they'll experience it, and the more they will learn it, and it'll just become a part of their playlist as they get older, and they won't have to work as so hard to rewrite their CD-ROM and add so many. So they already have a lot of really great songs to their playlist.
Wonderful. Well, and you mentioned again that idea of modeling, us as parents modeling for our children. But we as parents, or just as human beings, benefit from having models around us too. Mm-hmm. And yet so often we're surrounded by, it can feel lonely. It can feel very lonely if you're taking a different route than previous generations or than your peer group around you. Do you have any recommendations or strategies for parents who are looking to build more of a supportive community for themselves to be able to thrive towards this?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be different for every family. Every family's got different things going on, and every person has different things that they're comfortable with. I very much believe there's been such a big thing to talk about self-care. I really believe that we should talk more about community care and how we care for each other in community. But go out and, any kind of like event, anything where you can find like-minded parents, where I mean, Facebook groups might be a thing, but anything that you can just unapologetically just be authentically yourself and don't try to hide what you're doing, you will attract others who are like-minded, who are interested, because there are likely other parents who are looking for the same kind of community that you're looking for too. And so we just have to kind of show ourselves, and I don't know, like I'm thinking of like almost like a peacock, and just kind of just show our colors to show that we are, we're on this connected and collaborative journey too. And you might be surprised about who you might find, who might come up to you. And I know everyone has different levels of comfort. So just know yourself and know what's good for you, and to meet your own needs, and just keep working on unapologetically being yourself and showing yourself. And this is almost a whole nother conversation, but avoiding being so bogged down in the judgment, because that has a tendency to we shut down when we feel judged, and we get smaller, and we won't show as much of who we are when we feel judged. Try to break through that, work on that, and you're going to need some mantras for that too, and keep going.
Well, I love that idea of the attraction piece, that, showing that side of you, the parenting that you're doing, inevitably creates that attraction, because people see that in you, and the positive parenting, or the positive humaning, I'll say, because it's not just for parenting, it's all of our relationships, right? And I recall at one point when my three were very little, and we were in a drugstore, and my eldest was having a very hard time. Epic tantrum. And I wouldn't have been able to do this every day. And I guess this is where I think as well that grace that we need to give ourselves, that not every day we're going to nail this. I don't know where I found it in me, Mr. Chazz, but that day I found my ultimate calm to just be present and be there without trying to fix, without getting upset. And I thought, part of me had that judgment piece, like, there is my child, screaming in this store, but my job is not to deal with the judgment, it's to support my son. I think that's what really did it. All my attention was on him. And something interesting happened at the checkout, and I think this fits to the idea of attracting. There was a teacher behind me in line, and by then my son, I think, was starting to wind down, but it was still obvious that he was having a hard time. And she said, "You are doing a great job." And I thought, oh, here I was, that little part of me worried about judgment, and she's saying, "You're doing a good job." And a guy behind me, an older gentleman, said something else equally as reassuring, but from a different perspective. And I thought, okay, I'm glad these people were in the store, because although I managed the situation well, I think I needed the validation. It was doing okay. So I love that. I wonder, as we wrap up, whether there's anything that you feel is not being discussed in our communities, whether it's our schools or in groups of parents, that you think should be talked about more.
Well, I think community care is one of the things that we talk a lot about, self-care and what you can do to care for yourself. And I do believe that is important. This is an and kind of situation, an and conversation. Yes, it's important that we learn how to take care of ourselves, and it's important that we learn how to take care of each other, and how we can give to each other, and how we can receive that from each other, and the importance of the village and building the village. We are so, especially in American culture, and in a lot of, this isn't most of the world, but these are many countries in the world, but especially in America, there's very much of an individualistic mindset that we have here, that we have to kind of do it all on ourselves. We got to lift our own selves by our bootstraps, which, I never really, always thought about, like, how do you actually lift your own self up? I never really got that. But most of the world is more collectivist, where it's more about the village and how do we support each other. And I think there's definitely conversation how we can maybe go a little bit too far over on one side, and the other side maybe too far on the collective side where there's no individuality. You can't choose what you do yourself, and everything you do is someone else is taking personally, and maybe too far on the individualistic side where there's no support, no help, figure it all out by yourself. And if you don't, then there's something wrong with you. I think there's definitely a happy medium where you can choose, what you do, and have some, individualistic choices and how you navigate life. And there is a community that is built to support each other. And that's something that can happen at many different levels. It can happen in a household level. It can happen in a classroom, in a neighborhood, in a state, in a government. It can happen on a global level. I would say start small and start with the little bit of community, whatever community that you have, whether it's just your household or just your group of friends, but start trying to build that community. And now sometimes we like to beat ourselves, and some people are more like to be with people more than other people. I 100% get that. Remember the importance of support. And maybe for you, like, I got it, I can do it all by myself. I don't need any support. I don't need any help. And maybe that's good for you, but I will say that that's a vast minority of parents who probably feel that way. And so just know that there are other people who are looking for their community too, but may not necessarily know how to build it or where to find others. So I think a lot of us are just looking for each other, but we're missing each other because, the world that we live in is becoming more and more disconnected, connected and disconnected at the same time, maybe more connected in a virtual world and less connected in the real world. So just remember to just the importance of it, not just receiving the care, but giving care. And I think when you give out, you get back in return one way or another.
Well, I think about that connection we're trying to cultivate with our children or students. It really does fan out, doesn't it? It's not just with them. It's with other members of our family, extended family, neighbors, and community. So I love that. I'm just picturing it fanning out and trickling out to expand. I wonder, for those that want to find out more about you, where should they look? Where can they find you?
Anywhere on social media. It's Mr. Chazz, MrChazz. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. I think I have two YouTubes, one for kids and one for adults. And I also have a podcast called Learning Curve with Mr. Chazz. So please check it out and subscribe. Follow me, and I'm here to support. I also do classes where I can teach you the conscious discipline framework. I also travel and go to different schools and spend time in classrooms, and also do speaking outside of the classrooms with the teachers and adults and parents. So really anything you need me for in terms of guiding and helping you guide children in a healthy and effective way, I'm trying to meet you where you're at.
I'll make sure to put that all in the show notes. Do you also have a book coming out?
Not yet, but I'm in the process. I'm continuously gathering more and more experiences and more ideas, because when it comes out, I want it to be a classic, something that is helpful for parents and teachers throughout the ages. I think there's already a lot of really great stuff in there, so it's in the works.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned for that part, Mr. Chazz. Yep. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you and to explore that emotional approach to connecting with our kids, ourselves, and our community. It really is all tied in together. So thank you so much for your time, Mr. Chazz.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information, and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.